Well, it's about that time. Good morning, everyone. I'm not going to give the official welcome yet. I'll be welcoming everyone officially in just a few moments after we hear announcements. The first announcement, as I think many already know, is that we need to silence our cell phones. Or if you're like me and your phone calls come in through your hearing aids, you might want to go with do not disturb. That's up to you, unless you want to be disturbed. We have three announcements so far, and if there are any more, I'd be happy if somebody would bring them up. Three announcements from Tina. The first one, pardon me, is that Meditation Monday has now become Truly Meditative Tuesday. And it will now meet Tuesdays at 11 a.m. here at the church. And that leads to the second announcement from Tina. That means that her office hours will be later on Tuesdays, 12:30 or 4:30. I'm assuming that's all. Yeah. 12:30 to 4:30. Yeah, okay. All PM, I'm assuming. Yeah. All right. This coming week, Tuesday, May 23rd, it is possible to have office hours, but please make an appointment so that you won't have to wait. From Dick Nielsen, Brad Mitchell called and wanted me to greet everyone for him. He's very happy where he's at and getting along fine. All right, thank you. Good to know. Yes, Roland.
Free thinkers at 1 o'clock.
Free thinkers at 1 o'clock. Okay. Here? Right here. Any others? Don't see any. Now that we've all heard the news that people have wanted to announce, I'd like to welcome everyone officially to Sky Island Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Wally Hoggett. I am facilitating this morning for the Reverend Tina Squire, our minister. To all those who are joining us live and in person here in the sanctuary, to all those who are joining us by Zoom, welcome. We are glad that all of you are with us today. Those here in the sanctuary, if you would please turn to the back towards the camera and wave to the folks who are joining us by screen. And folks on the screen, go ahead and wave back if you want, even though we can't see you. Or maybe we can see you. In any event, wave to each other. Thank you. Well, with all of that, welcome everyone.
We need to light the chalice.
But we were getting there after the welcome.
Right. Well, we have a couple of welcomes.
Yeah, we do.
We are just a welcoming congregation. That's what we are. So, for the second time, welcome everyone. Everyone actually present, all on Zoom. If there are any first-time attendees today, and if you would like to make yourselves known, feel free to do so. That's not a requirement. Don't feel like we are putting pressure on you, but if anyone wants to do that, now's your chance. Don't see anyone volunteering. And if there is anyone who is here with a greeting from another UU congregation and you'd like to share that with all of us here, we are a church of the open mind, the loving heart, and the helping hands. In our congregation, we do not share a common set of beliefs, but we do share a common intention to strengthen the powers of love, justice, and peace within us, between us, and in relationship with the web of all existence of which we are a part. Whatever your race, whatever your gender, wherever you were born or how long ago, whatever your job or your rate of pay, however many times you've been married, however long or short a time you spent in school, whoever it is you love and whoever it is who loves you, and whatever superpowers you have that your secret identity will not permit you to reveal, you are welcome here. Now the chalice lighting. As we light our chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism, hear the words written by the Reverend Julian Jamaica Ninan Soto from their book, Spilling the Light, Meditations on Hope and Resilience, published in 2019. This book sustained many of us and was useful for worship readings during COVID. Until recently, Reverend Julian was the lead minister of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland in California. They have served on the Journey Toward Wholeness Transformation Team Committee of the UUA and are married to the Reverend Sean Parker Dennison. A simple hope. Last year, the IT toy was some kind of beeping computerized egg. The frenzy and desperation reaching for the perfect gift. Sold out everywhere, this egg. Hope can be kind of like that. People strain and struggle for the perfect definition. Is it now? Or future perfect, as in we will have survived. They argue over whether we even need a hope more present than a maybe, even when you don't feel it. A healthy hope is the power, and beyond that, the choosing to stay. Stay with the doubt and fear. Stay with the work that it takes to resist. Leave giving up for another day. You could wrestle the words or sensations of hope to the mat, or you could let this moment be enough. Belonging here together be sufficient. Feast on our irrepressible power to stay. We are a covenantal community, and as such we support each other when times are bad, and we rejoice together when times are good. And if there are any additional joys or sorrows, we've heard the one from Dick about Brad Mitchell, and we're glad to have that good news, that joy about him. If there are any others, well, for all the joys and the sorrows that are left unspoken, that are felt by those in this community, both here and by Zoom, I will now place our stones in the water, and that represents each particular joy, each particular sorrow, whether shared or unshared.
So I misled you. I said this sermon was going to be about resilience after COVID. I found some really interesting articles about resilience after COVID, but they were written for CEOs of large corporations. One insight really warmed my heart as a mama. It talked about the 4 generations in the workplace, but I think there really are 5. You know, the silent, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. And they said about Gen Z, well, they said in general, Angela Duckworth talks about grit, and it's what helps you persevere and develop your skill and keep on going over and over again, though you make mistakes. And it is the predictor of the people who will succeed most, not whether they have innate talent. It's how you keep on going. And one of the most important things you need for grit is to have a goal, a big dream that you're heading towards, and to put all your other dreams towards it. And one problem right now in workplaces with all these different generations is they're very aware of having different goals, especially after the pandemic. And Gen Z wants a workplace that is inclusive and working towards standing up for climate justice. And if you win the trust of someone who's Gen Z, they will give you loyalty. So I thought that was interesting, but not really maybe helpful for all of us, except be nice to some of the Gen Zs that come sometimes. But what about resilience in general? I found some wonderful things before the pandemic ever hit that I think are still useful now. And it doesn't hurt to talk about resilience 2 or 3 times a year. At least I don't think so. The first, I found a really interesting TED Talk in Christchurch, New Zealand, with someone named Lucy Hone. She talks about the 3 secrets of resilient people. And she used to be a researcher and a lecturer talking about resilience. And then in 2014, she was thrown to the other side. She had such a big loss in her life that she started wondering, well, everything I've said to people, does that work for me? One day in 2014, she and her family and another family were at the coast in New Zealand, and her daughter and her daughter's friend and their dear friend, one of the mothers, hopped in a car, and as they drove down the coastal road, a stone crashed on them, killing them all. So she lost her 12-year-old daughter. And of course, she was heartsick, just heartsick. And she was sent really helpful material that said things like, oh, your family is much more likely to disintegrate now. Watch out for your marriage, because it's going to be really under stress. And she finally just ripped up the brochures she was sent and said, okay, what do I know? What has been my spiel for the past few years? And she went out and discovered, yes, it helped her. It probably could help other people. There really are 3 things resilient people do. First, resilient people realize suffering is part of life. It's going to happen to all of us. And that's important to know because you don't feel singled out. Or as in my mother's case, my mother was from New England, and she would say, with her Puritan sense of punishment and guilt, my father died young. What did I do wrong? My mother died younger than other mothers. What did I do wrong? She saw these horrible things as punishment. And I think some of us carry that Puritan sense of punishment with us. But if we realize bad things happen, it's just part of life. It's not that we're singled out. Other people have awful things too. We feel less alone and less judged by the universe. She says, too, resilient people don't diminish the negative, but they've worked out a way to tune into the good. And she points out the way we live right now, how many of you frequently get updates on your phone about what's happening in the world, breaking news? How often is that really uplifting, cheering news? We are hardwired, as part of evolution, to notice the negative. That's what sells newspapers, right? But it's constant now. So we're at this sense of alert and exhaustion, constantly bombarded by that. And she says you have to also look for the good. And she cites a researcher that had people for 6 months, every day, name 3 good things that had happened to them that day. And after 6 months, they discovered, yes, these people were less depressed, less likely to have suicidal thoughts. It really helped to have thought about good things. She says when you're in grief, you might need to remind yourself. In their kitchen, they put up a poster that said, good things happen. The U.S. Army phrases it, hunting the good. But however it works for you, it's important to remind yourself of the good in your life. And finally, I think this is a really good one. Resilient people ask themselves, is what I'm doing right now helping me or hurting me? Is that extra glass of wine really helpful or not? And she, Lucy, had the opportunity to go to the trial. There was another driver involved as well with the rock and the driving and the crash, and he was at fault. And she had the opportunity to go, but she thought, would this help me or not? So she stayed home. Much later, her husband decided to meet with the driver separately. So that's a very good question to ask as well. Bad things happen, look for the good, and ask yourself, is what I'm doing now helping or hurting? I also found a Buddhist nun, a Zen Buddhist nun named Sister Dedication True. And she does a beautiful meditation to help with resilience. I recommend looking for it. It's another TED Talk. But it's a walk meditation, but she makes it also for people who are in wheelchairs. And she starts out and says, when you go outside, like when you leave the building today, feel the air. Just feel the air. Hear the noises. A bit quieter today than other days, but there may be noises. Just be present. And she says in Zen Buddhism, we often ask questions to make us be present more. And the first one is, who are you? Who are you? If you really think about who you are as a human in a long line of humans, as part of this interconnected web we talk about in Unitarian Universalism, who are you? Can you be an ambassador for your species? If you ask that question and really think about it, sometimes you can be more compassionate with yourself and other people and find inner strength. The next question is, where are you? Are you rushing so much you don't even notice what's going on? I have to admit, this morning I was rushing pretty hard. I had one shoe on and one shoe off. I got here by 10, but I'm not sure I felt the air or breathed, right? But it's important to notice where you are, be alive to that. And finally, what do you want? What do you want with what Mary Oliver would call your one precious life? What is your grit, big picture goal? What do you want to make happen? Angela Duckworth has one. She's the one who talks about grit, and for her, she's discovered over the years, it's helping kids to thrive and survive. And that's helped her with all the lower down goals you might have to move around. What is your big picture goal? And what do you want to do with this life? What do you want in this life? What is that big overarching dream and hope you have? That really, really helps with resilience. So now I just want you to wiggle a little in your chair. If you want to stand up and stretch, you can do that. Turn around. This week, on May 17th, was the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. And so in the second part, I'm going to be looking at some of the wisdom that two different counselors who are trans and work with the community have given for the community and also probably helpful for us. So a really dear friend of mine in seminary who had lived a very, very different background from me. When there was fighting in my seminary about the gender for God, I mean, at least Unitarian Universalists would just throw God out, but they were, for young African-American women, sometimes God was the only daddy they knew, and they wanted to use he pronouns. And a lot of women were very upset by that, white women, because, the man had been awful, and they didn't want to think of God as male, right? Funny the battles we get into, right? But he came up with a kind of formula that was helpful. He said, we can never compare our pains, right? There's like no competition. We, however, can get together on the level of pain. We have all suffered grief. We've all had loss. We all can get that, right? I think that's a really good starting point. I think it's really important to try to be empathic about people who might be different or facing different things. But I think we also have to remember that every situation is different. There was, the women who needed to call God he had a different background and experience from the women who didn't. And it was important to understand that. And so when I discovered these really great transgender counselors, one is Taylor Morris, who works at the University of Florida with university students, and one is Beck Gee Cohen. They both have a lot of insights and talk about, well, it's different. Taylor says cis people, people who, present as the gender they were born as, it's all, because they don't have the experience of being trans, they don't recognize just how many additional layers there are in everyday decision-making, on top of decisions about where do I go, where do I not go, how do I dress for this given environment, who's going to be at this event, is there a bathroom I can use or feel safe using, and imagine if you're moving. Is there going to be a trans-friendly doctor in the place I'm moving to? Can I get my hormones? We don't understand the level of exhaustion, extra exhaustion. Each one of us has daily difficulties. If, as a cis woman, I'm bombarded by messages to look a certain way and be a heck of a lot thinner than I am, right? And look a lot younger and have, where's the gray hair? And there are those messages. But it's the added layers, especially in our society right now, what it means to be trans, are just exhausting. And it's really important, given everything that is happening right now, that we acknowledge that and we acknowledge the day, again, International Day, standing up for it. Because we know that throughout red states, there are attempts to limit access for trans people to the hormones they need, sometimes for children, sometimes for adults as well. This week, a young trans woman in Mississippi decided not to go to her graduation because she was not allowed to wear a dress. Part of the laws being worked on in Florida will not allow teachers to present themselves as the gender they feel comfortable being. The onslaught is just going on, and I don't need to re-traumatize us over that. We just need to know it's happening, and that we, as a community that believes in the inherent worth and dignity of every person and being, need to stand up and do things and be present for that. This week, Reverend Bethany told me about a friend of hers who's a minister in Iowa. And the focus of their church for youth, their sole focus right now, is on kids who are homeschooled. Not the type who are homeschooled because they don't believe in evolution, the type who are homeschooled because it's not safe for them to be transgender and go to a public school. That's pretty impressive. There are ways we need to stand up and be present and try to understand. And there's advice that doesn't hurt for us to hear as well. Taylor talks about finding support, all types of support. Finding other people who are transgender, if you are and you're going through transition. Finding people who are understanding, even if they aren't. And he also talks about finding resources where you don't expect to. When he started college, he had to live in the dorm. That was part of his scholarship. But he didn't want to live in a woman's dorm, but that's how it was set up then. So he went to the dean of housing, finally, after trying many avenues, and they said, well, officially you have to live in a woman's dorm. Let me think about this. And they had medical rooms where people have their own bathroom and their own room, set up for people with disabilities. But in this instance, there was an extra one that was just going to be randomly assigned. And so he was able to live on campus, but not have to share a bathroom in a dangerous situation. And this person, he still remembers. He says, I bet she doesn't even remember what she did for me, but it made my first year of college. So there are resources. We just have to hunt. And all of us, for resilience, need to find support. Morris also talks about having a forward orientation. It can be a long process to transition. Some people, this one woman described putting on a dress for the first time and just sitting on her porch. That was, the safest place first to be. It is a long process. But if you have in mind the goal, kind of like grit, I want to look like this. And Taylor did description and drawing of what he wanted to be. And it looks a lot, now he looks a lot like that drawing. It's come to fruition, but it took many, many years. He also talks about being aware of your core self. So if you're going through a really difficult time, let's say you're transitioning, or just in life, other times, like you have a family member in hospice, or your life is upended, you still have a core sense of who you are. Tap into what you really love, what really is you. Find that core. Sometimes the people I visit who will have to stay home all the time, taking care of somebody, have lost a sense of who they are in the world. But sometimes together they piece together what they love. That core sense of who they are comes up. And both Morris and Guy Cohen talk about gender euphoria, not just dysphoria. With the stressors, there's a lot of joy. Morris says, I look in the mirror and I feel so much pride of being truly myself now. For a lot of my life, I wondered, would it really be possible? And then to have it so soul-fulfilling, to be so authentic. It's just a daily thing that happens when I look in the mirror now. But it's such an amazing affirmation. There's a kind of euphoria that comes with being who you really are, being the gender you feel you are. And we know that in other ways, don't we? And Guy Cohen talks about any one of us who's working with somebody who's transgender, to be more understanding, we have to think about our own sexuality and gender, right? None of us is some uniform monolith. Much of what we are is constructed by culture. 2 centuries ago, it wasn't pink for girls and blue for boys, it was reversed. So many of the trappings we've taken on, our understandings, do we think about them? It was helpful for me to think about what it's like for me as a cisgender woman. It's a little more difficult than being a white, straight man, right? There are times, I don't think in the daytime about where I go, but I certainly think about it at night, right? But think of those added layers if you have to think about more. So we're invited to think about who we are at many levels as we interact with other people. I want to end with the ending from Sister Alex Capitan, the ending of choice. So if anyone ever tries to invalidate you or the way you seek intimacy by saying it's just a choice, tell them choice is sacred. Tell them that the inherent right of every person to have full authority and agency over choices they make about their lives and their bodies is a spiritual and human imperative, that there's a word for this, and it is liberation, that there's nothing more worth fighting for. And Morris talks about that. Boy, to know who I am and who I want to be and to be really proud of what I've been through to get there, that's part of the euphoria. That's part of the liberation. Tell them that in your faith tradition, we don't love people despite their differences or because they can't help being different. We love people because of their differences and because diversity enriches our world and our communities. Tell them that in the final reckoning, there is only one choice that will be judged, and that's their choice. Tell them you hope they choose love. And may it be.
Our closing words, Snowflakes, a Guide, were written by the Reverend Julian Jamaica Ninan Soto, and again, it comes from their book, Spilling the Light, Meditations on Hope and Resilience. How do we spring back into shape after a long week, an election season that drags, a broken heart that's still not healed, raw but beating? No duct tape will cover those cracks. No glue will mend the gap. Some people think they can shame you, make you small by calling you a snowflake. What they don't know is this: the snow is bright because the lines and lacy edges, the crystals stacked, reflect back the light shone down on them, and the light keeps shining just as you do. In this community, you choose each other. You insist on blazing brilliant. Your unique configuration is the universe's expression of what it means to be alive. And together, many snowflakes make a mountain. You return to knowing yourself and being yourself by the clarity of that reflection. You can lay your burdens down and rest. Lean into the place where you belong. Allow the brightness of who you are, both individual and community, to light the way toward the future you are building with your love. Go in peace.